future. So welcome again. Today we'll be discussing the Town of Caroline Vulnerability Assessment. Town of Caroline Vulnerability Assessments, we started in last year, actually, in about November, December, we started really working on this. And it's in collaboration, again, with the Cornell Cooperative Extensions, Town of Caroline, and the New York Water Resources Institute. And again, for those who don't know me, I think everyone knows me here. My name is Osamu, and I work with the Cornell Cooperative Extensions with Terry Carroll, who is also joining us today, working on the Climate Smart Communities program. And if I would like to let this be an opportunity for everyone to just, if you could state your name and also just give a brief introduction, that would be great. So start with you, Joe, maybe.
Sure, Joe Wilson. I live on Hunt Hill Road, very near Caroline, and I'm on the Dryden Planning Board, among other things.
Okay, next we have up Irene.
I'm Irene Weiser. I'm a town board member in the town of Caroline.
Forward to hearing this presentation.
And then Elizabeth.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Wolf. I work at Cooperative Extension, and I'm also a Caroline resident.
Terry.
Yeah, this is Terry Carroll with Cornell Cooperative Extension. I manage the Clean Energy Communities program, and we, help Osama with the Climate Smart Communities program. And so I'll be helping him today by monitoring the chat. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to post it there, and I'll be trying to get that information to Osama to answer any questions.
Next we have up Leslie. I think you're on mute.
I was. My name is Leslie Connors. I'm a Town of Danby board member, and I'm an interloper in this meeting.
Great, welcome. Kristen.
Hi, I'm Kristen Hitchka. I am a Town of Caroline resident. I live in on Wood Lane Road. I'm on the Watershed Committee, the Town of Caroline Watershed Committee, and I work at the New York State Water Resources Institute, and I've worked with both Osamu and Terry.
Next we have up is Mark.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Osamu. Mark Whitmer, Town Supervisor, Town of Caroline.
Thanks, Mark. Will. I think we're on.
On mute? No.
We're on mute. No, you're fine. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm working on age-friendly Caroline. I live in Caroline.
Okay. Angel.
Sorry.
That's it.
This is Angel from, I work with Tompkins County Soil and Water, and anything from stormwater to streams to drainage issues. I'm on Snyder Hill Road. I'm in the town of Dryden, but really close. But either way, I've worked with the town on multiple matters. So I'm joining in here if I can be any assistance.
Thanks, Angel. The last person we have is a phone number 607-227-6230. Right now, I think you're on mute.
They are, yeah.
Yeah.
Osamu, I wonder if there's a way to adjust the sound, because you're coming across fairly softly, Ms. Henkel quite softly. So it's a little difficult to keep following what people are saying. Is there a way to adjust that?
Let me see if I can get that.
Joe, I wonder if it's your machine, because people came through quite clearly to me.
I'm not sure. You're coming across clearly, but Osamu and Ms. Henkel are not.
Maybe I'll try to speak louder. Maybe that might be. Can you hear me okay now?
It's better. Yeah, you're
Okay.
a soft talker, so to speak, I think.
Microphone.
Osamu?
Yes.
This is the phone number. This is Lawrence Sparling, Town of Dryden board member.
Great. Thanks.
I don't have the internet, so I can't see you. So, but I'm on Zoom.
Well, I'll try to make this as verbal as possible.
Okay.
Follow along.
Thanks.
Okay. So to get started, again, this climate vulnerability assessment is part of the Caroline effort to become a climate smart communities. Climate smart communities is a program to help municipalities throughout New York State increase climate resilience, decrease fossil fuel dependence, and to create a more sustainable regional economy region-wide. And the town of Caroline actually became a bronze certified climate smart communities as of August 2019. And as a continued effort, we're working with Mark, who has been great, Mark Whitmer, to continue this effort around climate resiliency. And as part of that, we are doing this climate vulnerability assessment, which we started again in last December. So what is a climate vulnerability assessment? Well, climate vulnerability assessment is, it basically is measuring and trying to understand the vulnerabilities in a specific community, in this case, the town of Caroline. And the vulnerabilities that we measure are according to the Hazard Identification and Risk Assessments Manual, which is part of FEMA. And the top 3 vulnerabilities that have been identified in the area have been flooding, heat waves, just move this to the corner here, heat waves, and droughts. And so who are the vulnerable parties? That is basically trying to figure out who these different vulnerabilities or phenomenons affect most. So which specific parties, meaning those who are economically disadvantaged, those who live in rural areas, which in the town of Caroline is many of you, those who might not have access to internet or other utilities that many others have on a consistent basis. And again, where are these vulnerabilities? Trying to figure out where exactly these vulnerabilities are located within the town and mapping them out for further analysis in the future. And then through that, that basically, just to give an idea of where shows a map of Caroline in the FEMA flood map, which again is, as many of you know, is really quite outdated. And this is hopefully going to be a good opportunity to address some of the concerns that are in this existing flood hazard map. And again, through all of this, we're going to create, we hope to use this as an opportunity to have a discussion around mitigation strategies and resiliency measures. So the climate vulnerability assessment overview, we started again with background research, data collection, preliminary outreach, and stakeholder engagement. And then we had a survey, which I hope many of you had an opportunity to look at or take. And again, if you have not, I can definitely share the link with you after this. And if you receive the invitation to take part in this vulnerability assessment, you should already have that in a previous email. But again, I can send you the link. Vulnerability assessment workshop. This was supposed to happen on April 1st, but with the coronavirus, we weren't able to do that. So as part of, and a substitute to that, we're having this Zoom meeting. And then analysis of the survey work and work results. And then we're going to be creating a report for this climate vulnerability assessment that will show all the different vulnerabilities as well as potential solutions to the vulnerabilities addressed in the town of Caroline. And again, just to clarify, this is also in collaboration with the county-wide all hazard mitigation plan, is working with Scott Doyle. And looking, again, this is more looking at things on a more local scale rather than on a county-wide scale. And this process takes approximately 6 months. Today's topics, we're going to be talking about climate projections, and then that specifically is divided into flooding, heat waves, and droughts. And then we'll have a discussion, further discussion, that will be approximately 15 minutes towards the end. And then another thing we want to talk about is the social implication, like who is affected, and have a discussion on like what are the potential solutions and what can we do to address these issues. Because again, just to clarify, we are from CCE, Cooperative Extensions, and neither Terry nor me nor Kristen nor anyone else that is working on this is an expert on the town of Caroline. So those who do live in the area or in the vicinity are the most, we're hoping on you all to provide any local knowledge about the area. So, and again, these 3 hazards that we're going to be talking about have been identified in the FEMA HIRA manual. And then again, this is going to be approximately 45 minutes from beginning to end this presentation. And between each section, between flooding, heat waves, and droughts, we will have about a brief Q&A session for people to ask questions in between. And again, we'll make sure that's apparent so everyone knows that it's time for asking questions or addressing any concerns or providing any feedback or comments. And then again, we'll have another 15-minute Q&A session at the end, and then another extended 30 minutes afterwards for those who want to continue talking about these issues. Our methodology that we're going to be using for this climate vulnerability assessment, again, we're using this as a place opportunity to look at where these vulnerabilities are located. The Cuyahoga County, Ohio methodology, which is Cleveland, Ohio, that use this method. It measures the physical and social factors of vulnerabilities. Social factors meaning resident age, disability, ill population, poverty, and many of the things which are already in existing databases in either federal or local county level sources. And then the physical factors, which is the environmental, floodplain, infrastructure, erosion, environmental degradation, and et cetera. And each factor is worth 2 points. And each different attribute is worth 2 points. So floodplain would be worth 2 points, residential age would be worth 2 points, et cetera. And you calculate them all together, and based on each parcel or based on each census block, we can calculate what areas are most vulnerable and why they are vulnerable, whether it is due to social factors or physical factors. And through that, we hope to figure out which areas are most vulnerable and potential solutions that we can create through that methodology.
Osama, do you know, are there funds available based on scores? Is this mostly just an exercise, or would we actually be able to find funding based on, if we score high in certain areas or whatever?
So this methodology, I guess, is just something we're using as part of this process. There's many different methodologies that can be used, and it doesn't mean that because you score high, you would receive credit for anything. But again, this is tied into the Climate Smart Communities program, which does provide grant funding for addressing these kind of issues, including infrastructure development or other potential programs that the town might be interested in doing. So the Climate Smart Communities grant program is something many municipalities have applied for and received funding to do various types of activities, including greenhouse gas reductions and flood damage mitigation efforts, etc. So through that, this will be tied into that, and it'll be basically give the town the opportunity to apply for that funding.
Okay, thanks.
And so to get into the average climate projections, we can see here in the central New York and the eastern part, capital region, between 1990 and 2010, there has been a change in temperatures. We can see less so in the North Country, and it is pretty already hot in the New York City region, and there has not been much change there. But the big thing to look at is the average temperature since 1970 to 2016 has increased approximately 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit. So to clarify, this is Fahrenheit and not Celsius. So between the approximately last 50 years, it has increased by 2.7 degrees. And to put that into context, if we continue at this rate at increasing temperatures on the states and federal level, and as a global community, this will show how physical damages. Let's see this. I think I have an echo here. All right. Let's see. So just to continue on, if we increase at this rate, at the top of this chart to the right, we can see increase in degrees in terms of Fahrenheit, and at the bottom is Celsius. And basically, at the bottom, we can see 2003 to 2012. That is where we currently are in that arrow. And if we continue on at 2.7 degrees every 50 years, we can see that the ecological, social, and physical changes are changed from small to moderate, meaning that the numbers of pandemics, the numbers of environmental hazards and climate change related storms, extreme weather events will increase significantly just with a 2-degree global increase. So just to put that into context, I guess if we continue on at this rate, we gotta be able to understand what the implications are and what we need to do to prepare for these changes. And the historical weather in New York State, again, has been relatively moderate, mid-Atlantic, humid weather, especially in the Finger Lakes region. Less so in the North Country, and again, a different scenario in the New York City area. But the temperature overall, as it increases, we have been finding intensifying rainstorms, increased intense other precipitory events such as snow, extreme weather patterns such as extreme heat, extreme cold, and extreme droughts. And as we go into flooding, this is the next topic. We're going to start with historical weather patterns. Historical weather patterns between 1958 and 2010, we have seen an overall 70% increase in heavy precipitation. And as we see here, Tompkins County is especially, there has been a significant change in Tompkins County in terms of the amount of precipitation that has been observed. That is heavy precipitation, meaning 3 inches of rain in 24 hours. Then there's a picture to depict what it looks like, what a 3 inches of rain in 24 hours can look like. 3 inches and above, that is. And then also gradual increase in overall precipitation, that is a cumulative amount of precipitation. As we see the timeline at the bottom here, 1960 to 2100, it's very hard to see what the changes are. So to help with that understanding, this is the seasonal chart between 1901 and 1930. And we can see that the overall high times when there's a precipitation is June and July and August. And then between 1961 and 1990, we have seen an overall increase in that precipitation throughout the year. And then again, from 1991 to 2016, we saw its peak above 100 millimeters of rain on a monthly level. That is especially for June. And again, July, it's getting close to 100 millimeters.
Osamu?
Yes.
I have something, I don't know whether this gets incorporated into where you're going with this or not, but it's long been a concern of mine. You know, there seems to be a misconception that when you have higher overall precipitation, that you're not as subject to drought, but that's not really true.
Yes, and that's actually a topic we were going to be discussing when we do
Great.
notes. So,
Good.
yeah,
Okay, I'll wait for you to get to it then, but it's, I'm thrilled to hear that you've cued into that, because it's a real misconception that a lot of people have.
yes, there's a real misconception about that. And yes, they're definitely going to be talking about that in the drought section, not so much in the flood section, but we'll be discussing that.
Okay, great.
Misconception. So the projected this is a historical weather observations, this specifically around rain. And for the projections for this precipitation, we have, and through droughts and heat waves, we'll have two different scenarios, the RCP 4.5 and RCP 8.5. RCP 4.5 is basically assuming that we're going to peak our greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 and then starts decreasing after that. And then the RCP 8.5 is high emissions and continuing to increase our emissions as the population increases, which is unfortunately, as we continue as we are today, would be the case if we continue past 2050. And obviously this changes the weather patterns, especially around flooding and extreme weather events, especially around the 100-year and 500-year flood zones, which are expected to change drastically over time. Background climate projections, the 50-year floods, just to give a bit of context, it's not really clear, or there's not any specific number in terms of the intensity. There is a formula to calculate the number of inches of rain that can occur in 1 hour, but to give it a basic idea, 50-year floods can be 1.96 inches of rain in 1 hour, for example. And 50 years does not mean once in 50 years, rather it means a 2% chance of occurring in a given year. And the same goes for 100-year flood zones. In this case, it's 2.67 inches in 1 hour in terms of intensity. And that means 1% chance of occurring in a given year. And as we see here with the when we're looking at the RCP scenarios, RCP 4.5 for 50-year flood becomes a 35 to 40-year storm. So this is given as we are projected to go from now to 2099, so 90 years from now. And then the RCP 8.5, which again, remember is the high emission scenario, is the storm becomes a 50-year storm becomes a 25 to 30-year storm. So the probability of that exact same storm that we consider 50-year flood would happen more often. And percent of days with a 100-year flood, this basically is a map that projects 2010 to 2039, the extreme weather events that we're expected to see, the increase. And as we see, it's about 5 to 10% moderate changes between 2010 and 2039, specifically around high extreme flood events. So that means around flash floods and tornadoes and other types of precipitory events. And then that is expected to, again, increase from, in our region, specifically 10 to 15% between 2040 and 2069. 2040 and 2069, we're expected to see a 10 to 15% increase in the Finger Lakes region. And then in 2070 to 2099, we're expected to see a much drastic change, a 20 to 25% increase in extreme precipitation. That is, extreme precipitation meaning 100-year flood occurs 20 to 25% more between the years of 27 and 2099. And this basically is it's not that great, but it depicts the intensity of a storm. And what the main thing I want you all to take away from this is the blue area is basically what we observe today in terms of high intensity rainstorms. The x-axis shows the number of hours, and as the hours increase, the number of inches of rain decreases. So as we look here, the pink area shows what we're projected to see between 2070 and 2099. It shows like an overall increase in the intensity of rainstorms and the frequency as well. And the identified problems from flooding and flash floods is ditch and culvert erosion and flooding, hazardous levels of runoff. These problems, just to clarify, are specifically to the town of Caroline and Tompkins County. Hazardous levels of runoff, road closures due to flooded infrastructure and roads, property damage, aquifer flooding / overflow, crop damage, contaminated water supply, and utility disconnection, such as electricity, gas, and internet. And between 1996 and 2012, the town of Caroline has spent approximately $50,000 on flash flood related damage. And here are some points that we have found to be the most vulnerable in terms of climate change. Erosion and landslides are the brown stars. Here we can see approximately 1 in the center part of the town of Caroline. Overflow, that's basically ditch overflow, stream overflow. We've seen a number of occurrences throughout the town. Vulnerable infrastructure, that is infrastructure that is eroding and or needs to be repaired and or rebuilt altogether. We see a number of incidents as well. Yard flooding, which we can also see is another issue that has been mapped here. And I guess this is the point now, if anyone has any additional questions about this section or has any comments or would like to go back to see a specific slides, this is an opportunity to do that. And then afterwards, we'll be going to the next section, which will be extreme temperatures. So does anyone have any questions? And another thing to think about, if there's no specific questions, is the discussion question is, what are your thoughts on flooding and extreme precipitation in the town of Caroline? And what other problems might the community be facing that has not already been discussed? What are potential solutions that are apparent, and we need to do to combat these hazards, specifically around extreme precipitation?
So Osamu, this is Elizabeth. And I just wanted to, I'm looking at the map and wanting to say that we live in a 100-year flood zone on Canaan Road, which is kind of the top corner of the east branch of the Owego Creek. And we've had, multiple kind of really heavy duty floods increasing. So, and I just see that's not on the map. I haven't taken the survey. I'll do that. But pretty dramatic, pretty fast rising, so just want to share that.
So you said you live on Canaan Road, and you are located in a flood zone.
We are, yes. And we have the creek, kind of crosses the road. So there are 2 points off of Canaan Road where our road floods. So pretty dramatically. And I know that there has been some road work done, but I can, it struggles to keep up, well, that I can say.
Are you saying that would there be a significant amount of, I guess, erosion, or like, is there a creek next to it?
There is a creek, yes, yeah, that crosses Canaan right where we are. So we're right on that Tioga-Tompkins border. And I think because Hammond Hill is a really high elevation, so things during storms, the creek rises really dramatically quickly and then drops relatively quickly. I mean, we've had 30 foot of water running off our porch. So, I mean, literally like, 5 feet off the porch that sweeps from, we happen to be kind of in a low spot on the road. And yeah, just watching that's happened, a few times since we've been here.
Has it had much effect on your, I guess, in your house or property, in terms of like, has your house flooded because of that?
So we have a wood shop. The wood shop is flooded, very dramatically, kind of quickly. We're drilling holes in the floor to drain water out. The house, we have a sump pump, and we've done a lot of work in the basement to kind of manage water. And because sometimes we lose electricity, because we've always managed to have electricity to keep those sump pumps running. If the sump pumps weren't running, we'd be in real trouble. And we bought a generator to kind of just in case.
Wow. So if you didn't have the sump pumps, it wouldn't.
We'd be in, yeah. And our house just happens to be kind of a little high, a little high rise in a low area with pretty steep hills in back of us. And
wow. Thanks for sharing that. That's very good to know. And again, this map is not obviously complete in any way. These are just a few points that we jotted down based on previous research and analysis and knowledge through other GIS data that we've collected over time. So yeah, these are specific points that we thought might be worth checking out. And I guess Canaan Road, is that a town road or a county road?
I don't, it's a town road, I think. I'm pretty sure.
Okay. Because I was gonna say, if it's a county road, Angel, who's also on this call, might know a bit something about that. But
so it's directly off of Harford Road, which is a county road.
Okay. Great. Well, thanks for sharing that. I'm taking notes here as we go on, so that we can improve this map and increase our number of data points for our analysis after this. Anything else?
This is Mark. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So I just happened to think of Buffalo Road Creek. Also, we've done recent work that was funded by FEMA there. And there's evidence of, and that was because of erosion of the creek. You could see trees, mature trees along the bank tipping, toothpicking. And so we, I guess last year, completed a project for 7 different sort of close sections on that. But there are still issues lower down on that creek, and it's a creek. The road, as a lot of roads do, runs right along the creek bottom, pretty much, or alongside the creek bottom. So it often presents a challenge to the road. So.
Okay. So in Buffalo, it's a Buffalo Creek Road.
Yeah, Buffalo Road Creek.
Buffalo Road Creek. Okay.
Yeah.
Buffalo Road Creek.
And we have another question from the chat, Osamu, from Will.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
So our yard already holds water because we have clay soil, and we're on a hillside, halfway down from the top of the hill, probably. I imagine there are a lot more places in Caroline than what shows on the map where you would have yard flooding, which of course will affect more than just water collecting in a basement. You know, it'll affect the trees
Thanks, Will.
and your ability to use your yard.
So, Wilma, I guess where geographically do you live again? If you don't mind sharing that.
Yeah, I don't mind. I'm just below the corner of Coddington and Middaw on Middaw Road. So we're just below the border with Danby on the west side of the map.
Okay. The west side. Okay.
We're north of where your blue star is, I think.
Oh, what just happened? Yes. So that is good to know. So it's closer to Speedsville. Yeah, that's definitely an area that we know is, you know, it's quite rough in topography.
No,
Could you repeat that again, Wilma? Maybe I've lost connection.
She's not. Osama.
we're near the foot of East Miller. We're near the foot of East Miller Road.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yes.
Near Caroline Depot? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, just jotting that down to make sure I know where that is in Caroline Depot. Okay. All right. Okay, so I guess for now we'll again, there'll be another opportunity for everyone to provide additional feedback or questions through this survey, through this presentation. So we'll continue on. Oh.
One more.
Yes.
So on that map, I can't read it well enough to tell whether you've identified as vulnerable structures the town hall in Slaterville.
Slaterville, we did not identify the town hall as vulnerable yet. But again, that is something that we're still looking into. These are mostly just using other GIS data sources.
Yeah.
Not really.
I don't know what became of the map from, it was a few years ago now, where Homeland Security met with us and we colored in areas where we have seen actual flooding, and whether you've shared that with Osama. But there have been some flooding incidents just a little further east than the town hall. And then there's flooding that happens behind the town hall. I mean, it's drained, but at Fountain Manor, which is the senior housing, there's flooding that happens, you know, and there is a drainage pipe there, and culvert that goes under the road and out to a little bit of a wetland area on the other side. But it still seems like it's relatively vulnerable. Mark, do you know the maps that I'm talking about?
I remember I think the exercise was at the Borg Warner room. Is that right?
Yeah, it was.
Okay, I don't know of those maps being here.
But Barry may have them. There was also another time where Barry and I met with the various emergency service providers and had them map out, you know, areas that have flooded in the past. And Greg Harrington and some others could identify a variety of places that they've dealt with flooding over the years. Some of it is households with basements that they've had to pump repeatedly. And some of it is sheet flow across the roads. You know, it's not been like major underwater stuff, but still, you know, that stuff that's required road closure temporarily and that sort of thing.
That is good to know. Yeah, because that area actually has not really been talked about. Usually it's, so far the meetings that we've been to, the areas that have been identified are the Brookendale region, because obviously we all know that that is a big area as well of concern in terms of.
Yeah, and well, and it's also way down at creek level, a lot of the homes here. Yeah, but there, some of it happened because, again, just east of Town Hall, where 6 Mile Creek crosses under 79, the culverts there, it's a bridge culvert. I think it's a box culvert. Anyhow, there have been problems with the state is supposed to keep that clear, I think, because it's a state highway, and when they don't keep that culvert clear, then there's been flooding on 79. So there are some vulnerable areas through Slaterville, some of which relates just to managing the culverts properly. But
okay, great. Yeah, let's continue this conversation. But again, we have to. We'll continue on to discuss the next section. So in terms of temperatures, extreme temperatures, we will be discussing the heat waves. So in the town of Caroline, we've seen an increase in the monthly temperatures, seasonal temperatures between 1901 and 2016. We can see the general patterns here for the historical levels. It's usually peaked around 22 degrees. Again, this is Celsius, so this is not Fahrenheit. And in terms of Fahrenheit, we've seen a gradual increase from 1950 to 2020. And to put that into context, this is the temperatures in terms of the observed changes that have been seen from 1952 to projected scenarios from 2099. And you can see here that if we continue on from 1952 to 2020, there has been approximately 5-degree increase in temperatures. And by 2099, we'll see another 5-degree increase in temperatures as our projected 8.5 RCP scenario. Increasing hot days. 35 hot days are usually defined as 95 degrees or above in Fahrenheit. And over the next, over the next 180 years at this point, we'll see an increase of up to 25 days between 2099 and 2020 and 2099. An additional 25 days a year that are above 95 degrees. So basically this year, whatever number of hot days we get plus an additional 20, basically another month of hot days. The number of hot days are usually seen in July, August, and September. And here's a more regional outlook of how the temperature has changed and will be projected to increase. Tompkins County is relatively average in terms of the temperature increase. And again, Seneca County you can see is especially high. But Tompkins, it gives you a basic idea of like how the temperature and characteristics are changing over time in terms of temperature.
why is Seneca so much higher? Do you have any idea?
We're thinking maybe because it's between the lakes, whereas Tompkins County is more inland. I mean, it does have access to the lake, but like towards the south, it's not, it doesn't have access to the lake, whereas Seneca County has, both sides are surrounded by lakes. So the projected scenarios here, we see here is a general trend between 2020 and 2100. The temperature is gradually rising and is expected to rise on an annual temperature from 60 degrees to 68 degrees, an 8-degree increase basically in the annual high temperature days. And annual high temperature meaning the highest temperature of every month averaged out into 1 year. So that's why it's 60 to 68 degrees. The potential vulnerabilities from heat waves, we can see are, especially in Caroline, are no cooling centers that have been created in Caroline, unequal access to air conditioning or no air conditioning at all, lack of guidance on what to do during a heat wave, and then no shade structures in public transit areas. That is like Route 79 where TCAT runs. Whereas most people usually have to wait on the side of the road on the hot concrete. Identified effects, heat strokes, overheating of household appliances, and inhibit normal body function, especially during really hot days. Weakened vegetation, meaning obviously the native vegetation in the region is not suited for especially high temperatures. So that is expected to change, and the number of invasive species, for example, is projected to change and increase over time, as we have already seen. And again, this is the end of the heat wave section. And if there are any questions or any comments, this is a good time to discuss that. Otherwise, if you have more general comments, we will again have another time towards the end where we'll be having a longer discussion.
When on the previous slide it said unequal access to air conditioning, is that specifically kind of taking into account our low-income population and elderly population that lives here? Because it's part of it is access, you know, and ability to pay, and some of it is also from the standpoint of the age of our population, more sensitivity to heat, less tolerance for heat as you get older. So
in this case, we're just looking at the specifically air conditioning access. So yeah, that's population that cannot afford to install an air conditioning unit in their home, or do not have one, maybe because they just, they can't, they're not allowed to, because maybe they live in an apartment, or the house that they don't own their house, so they can install a better, more energy efficient air conditioner, for example. So I guess in that way, in that context, we're looking at air conditioning. But again, different tolerance levels is also an issue, because obviously not everyone can tolerate high temperatures.
Osamu, was that based on some kind of inventory of heat pumps and air conditioning units, or is it more observational or in general?
This is based off of partially observation, but also part of the Tompkins County Oil Hazard Mitigation Plan that was identified as they did a brief analysis of the different homes, inventory of the homes in Tompkins County, and I guess most rural areas, including the town of Caroline, have been identified as there's many houses that do not have air conditioning. Many times, maybe it's because they don't need air conditioning, or maybe because people are not able to afford air conditioning.
I think I'll just point out that there is something happening right now that's likely to shift that considerably, and that's the promotion of heat pump technology. So if people transition to a heat pump for heating their homes, they automatically get air conditioning, and it's reasonably affordable. There are incentives for it. So anyway, about of course the Heat Smart programs and everything. So I'm optimistic or hopeful that that issue is going to be addressed.
Yes.
I'm not quite as optimistic for our vulnerable populations because of their poverty. I don't, the incentives, Mark, and I think I've been following that stuff pretty closely. They're really, they're okay. They're not good. The utility incentives aren't even going to be as good as what NYSERDA was giving. So it's,
I know that, but I'm just saying that there is this technological transition occurring that is going to affect at least the number of people that have access to air conditioning. And my hope is that that as things progress, that it becomes more affordable so that people who are on the lowest income levels can get it. Operationally, it's cheaper than their existing heating systems. So that's transition.
I'm sorry for interrupting.
Sorry.
But no, that's fine. That's great. And yes, again, the purpose of this, I guess, climate vulnerability assessment, yes, to figure out who exactly. So yes, addressing the concern of who these people are and where they are located, and maybe figuring out how we can provide them services like the ones that you're talking about. So yeah, this basically is first trying to figure out where they are and who these people are, and so that we can actually figure out solutions to address those problems. So, and again, this is the first step for addressing a lot of these issues here. So since we're running a bit short on time, I will continue on to the next section. Again, we'll have further discussions after this presentation. So be assured that you'll have an opportunity to give your comment and feedback. So next section is droughts. Other trends in New York State have shown that droughts have, we have had a big drought in 2016 to look at the most recent one, 2017, as it shows on the chart to the left, less rainy days. And that less rainy days meaning days where there has been less steady rain. So this does not count days that are just extreme precipitory events that maybe only last 1 hour or 2 hours or 3 hours or maybe even just half the day. Because as we are most used to in the northeastern region, we usually are used to calm and multi-day rain days in which the ground is quite saturated over time. And we're less used to these kind of events where it's really hot one day and then there's a thunderstorm where there's a flash flood, which is supposedly the more what we're projected to have over the course of the next 50 to 100 years and into the future. And so this drought projection, as we can see here, in the general trend is we're not expected to see significant increase in the number of droughts, but as we can see to the timeline to the left, there is a gradual upward movement of the number of droughts. And to the right, we can see how this seasonal change affects the droughts and how this affects the weather patterns. So this is between 2020 and 2039. We're seeing a relatively low increase in the number of days of dry spells. And as you can see, just to note, in the middle is 0. So as it is in the center and does not go up or downward, that means that there's no change from what we see today. Whereas in 2040 to 2059, we see a more jump in this behavior and an increase of days with dry spells. And then again, this is, for some reason, the graph is shifting here, but we can still see that the number of days between 2060 and 2079 go way above 0, especially after August, September, and October. We see significant number of prolonged heat spell, dry spells. And here, as I mentioned, while we don't see a significant increase in the number of droughts, like California has seen, and like they have been dealing with the wildfires, we do see an increase in precipitation as this graph to the right shows. The blue that's going upward is the occurrences that we expect to observe over time, that it's expected to get more wet. So more floods, more precipitation. But again, one thing to keep in mind is that these precipitory events that are considered wet are also going to be, I guess, intermittent, and they will be more extreme weather events, meaning that more rain in a given hour and then no rain at all, which will lead to extreme droughts. Because as many of you know, when you water your plants and when it's been a while, when you try to water the soil is usually not as absorbent as it would be if you were consistently watering. So it takes a while for water to drain through the soil. And it's the same thing for like the natural environment. If you have a drought for a long time, the ground hardens, and as a result, the number of flash floods increase because the ground is not able to absorb all that water in a short period of time. So even though we are expected to see an increase in the number of precipitory events, these precipitory events are going to be extreme precipitory events, which means that we will also see a major fluctuation in the number of droughts as well, and therefore an increased number of droughts.
And Assam, I want to point out, this is great to see this, because I haven't seen a lot of places that, are thinking about it this way, and that it shows how things have changed in the way that this stuff is getting thought about. But, something that makes us particularly vulnerable here in Caroline is we do not have any piped in water, municipal water systems. Everybody here is on well and septic. And even during, in our groundwater, granted, our groundwater is deeper down, so any particular given year is not likely to cause problems for our aquifers that people are using for groundwater. But over time, the sheet flow off of the surface, as opposed to the water that penetrates deep into the ground, is going to cause problems for people's wells. And we did have in the year that we did have the noted drought, there were several wells that dried up, at least temporarily, and it caused crop damage, of course, but that then also impacted farmers who had livestock, because they weren't able to grow enough of their own crops to feed through the winter, and prices got very high. And one farmer whose wells went dry, and he was lucky to be able to afford to drill another well and tap into some water. But the problems compound on each other. It's not because of the vulnerability of our aquifers. So it's not just about vegetation and loss of trees and plants. It's really also about water supply to many of our households and farms.
Yes, and that is, again, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's actually the thing that we are identifying as a hazard specifically in the town of Caroline, because all residents, they're all relying on private water supplies, that is their own private wells. So the effects of droughts, as we continue on, is the crop damage, obviously, as you noted, degraded and limited water supply, because the aquifers cannot absorb the water from these extreme precipitory events, but also because the water that is absorbed is usually because it's major runoff, and as a result, more erosion occurs, and the quality of the water is obviously not as good. And because of the lack of vegetation, again, because of vegetation plays a major role in filtering out the water. Tree plants dying to lack of water, again, that's vegetation. Degraded natural habitat for aquatic species, again, that's more around specifically the high levels of runoff and the high nutrient levels, especially around the Cayuga Lake, Cayuga Lake, in increasing in the amount of algal bloom, for example, and then increased flash flood runoff again, and then erosion, And then all of these effects would have a major negative effect on natural and built environments. So obviously the public health safety is a major issue. And then the public safety, emergency management, and as well as the general natural environment. And
Yeah, I guess I'd want to see you add to that list groundwater recharge or aquifer recharge is decreased.
Yeah, because again, that is, and again, because many residents rely on their own private well, that is something that needs to be addressed. And again, just to make note that all of these factors are going to be included in the final analysis of this climate vulnerability assessment as we discuss the mapping, where we're going to be scoring each area and its vulnerabilities. These are the different factors that we consider in that analysis. So yeah, if there's any other questions, besides Irene, unless Irene, you have an additional thing to add? Okay, so just to go over again the overview of these vulnerabilities that we've seen, that due to these three different types of weather changing events is infrastructure, obviously road, bridges, dams, culverts, ditches, etc., all vulnerable to these high precipitory or extreme heat weather events. Agriculture, obviously, that's a big problem, especially around crop and harvesting, invasive species, pests, and then runoff. All of these things can not just lead to the low yield in crops, but also the contamination of neighboring parcels, neighboring properties, and water supplies as well. Residential houses, mobile homes, that obviously is household damage that is caused due to flooding. Utilities, electric, gas, and water lines, and sewage waste disposal, all of that. Obviously sewage is not a thing that exists in Caroline, but electric, gas, electric and water lines, I guess mostly electric in this case, is a major concern, and especially around like internet and telephone service lines, all of that being cut off. And as a result, if there is an emergency, people obviously would not lose access to all of that. And looking at these vulnerabilities in the context of heats, droughts, and extreme heat events, droughts, and flooding. Local and regional services and connectivity, routes to and from hospitals, fire departments, police stations, and the EMT services, and which I know, Irene, you've been working on, and all of these connections and connectivity, as well as collaboration between these different institutions and services, and how these will be affected due to the this changing climate, as well as how there might be methods to mitigate these problems. And then community resilience, obviously, is just general response from the community, and emergency shelters, evacuation procedures, digital network access, food and medical supplies, and whether the community is equipped to handle any of these problems. And then the last that we're going to be looking at is the physical factors, which we discussed at the beginning, that we'll be looking at, that physical factors that are threats to the community is erosion and flood zones, being located in property being located in a flood zone, which I know Elizabeth was talking about, her living in a flood zone, and that would be considered as a vulnerability, obviously. Experiencing groundwater flooding, which we've encountered multiple times through our multiple meetings we've held with different boards and community committees in the town of Caroline. groundwater flooding, as well as, I guess, Irene was saying the water contamination is another issue. Lacking healthy vegetation, trees, bushes, grass, contain hazardous waste, landfill sites, Superfund, and I guess the potential hazards that those sites can create from excessive runoff, for example. Producing significant runoff, again, that's all connected. And these are the main things that we're looking at in terms of physical factors. And then for the social factors side, we're looking at the, from the resident's perspective, is the resident or are the residents lacking access to internet? Are they older or younger and maybe need assistance in relocating or being helped with during one of these types of events? Are they disabled? Are they ill? Are they low income? Are they poverty? Or they have a lack of resources? Or do they live in an apartment complex or an apartment in which they do not have complete authority over their living conditions? And those are the main factors that we're looking at in the context of all these vulnerabilities. And again, but this is not a complete list. So I guess this is where I would like to encourage everyone to provide any additional factors that they think need to be considered in this list, as well as other things that need to be addressed that have not yet been talked about in this presentation. And there I would like to say thank you for sticking with me until now. And again, I would like to open this up for discussion and questions and answers, and we'll try to address these as best we can.
Samu,
Yes.
this is Mark. I have a question or observation about the infrastructure of ditching infrastructure that we know is important in shepherding water properly away from roadways and enabling the roadways to function properly and hold up. But we know from Rebecca Snyder's work that the ditches and drain tile can really aggravate flooding problems during storm events.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just wondering, I was just wondering if there would be a way to evaluate that infrastructure in sort of more, in a more detailed way to say what's the potential for improving it to mitigate flooding. So is it, are there, and I know, this is, I think this is a frustration that we've all felt, that we know this is occurring, but then, you have the ditches and what do you do with the water? And it depends on the slope, the particular situation. So it's kind of difficult to know. So Angel might have some insights here. I know there's guidance for how ditches are constructed in different circumstances, but I'm thinking of like, if there's a way to evaluate the ditches and culverts in a particular town or in our town and say, is there potential for modifying them in a positive way to mitigate flooding events?
Yeah, and I don't see Angel on here anymore.
He was just a second ago, but
Here,
maybe she was.
I turned my camera off because I had kids coming and
Okay.
wanting something, and then this, and then wanting food, and then going outside. So, but I'm here. So, did you want me to speak, or did you want to go?
Definitely, like you're the expert on these.
No, I'm not an expert, but I didn't know if you were gonna, because I know Samu worked with me, not this past summer, but the summer before, and he was involved. Him and his coworker at the time, they did a lot of ditch mapping. So I think, Samu, you have all the data, but if you don't, we can take a look at it and see how much of the ditches in the town of Caroline are mapped. So that's going to be our starting point. The mapping is really the starting point. And I can also, I have a coworker, you know, we're all working from home right now unless we have field work. So she's been asking for more work. So if there's some other things that she can do on this, but anyway, we've been mapping ditches. We've been mapping data associated with those ditches, such as, you know, the erosion, the vegetation cover, and so direction of flow, where they enter the streams. So that was kind of our first step, is to get that done and then start to do more intense evaluation. So the evaluation, in how other places have done it, is they look at the locations where there's direct discharge into a stream, and then you start to work from there and say, what can you do? So is it where you can do modification to the ditch? Is it a stability issue? If it's a volume issue, you know, there's other things that can be done. It's just, you know, do you have the land area to deal with it? Like if you were to you know, take that water out of the ditch, is there a way that, you know, are there, you know, small wetland complexes or fire retention areas, and, you know, how much water are you dealing with? But I think that there's definitely a possibility to move forward on that and start looking at that and do it on a case by case. But every case you're going to have to look at, you know, that watershed. What amount of water are you dealing with? What options do you have? Is there the land area? Is there willing partners, or is there willing landowners? You know, kind of all that. You know, there's only so much that can be done within the ditch. So, and we're trying, at least, you know, a lot of, like, between our office and Upper Susquehanna Coalition I work with a lot, they're really trying to get some projects on the ground. Jeremy Waddell, and he's real interested in so like small wetland complexes, you know, a stormwater wetland to hold that water. It's just showing that it's just so important. And I know Chemung County's been doing a lot where they're getting the water off the road, and they're letting, you know, various practices on before it goes downhill, just to hold that water back. And they're just finding it's been really successful, and the highways have been really happy with what they've done, so that it's not tearing up the road in the ditch. So we gotta start.
So yeah, I think that's great. That's a great start for, I know we do have the data for mapping the ditches. And from my knowledge, Mark, I guess to answer your question, and Angel, we did do Caroline pretty thoroughly.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, you did. Yeah.
There were specific areas in which we were unable to get a proper connection with the internet. And like cell reception was pretty spotty towards the south, especially around the Speedsville area. But I know we did a pretty thorough job with the town of Caroline. And
yeah.
I think we can use, I mean, I don't actually have the data, but I would think it might be a good idea to use that in this vulnerability assessment.
Yeah.
And answer, Mark, your concern, especially around infrastructure, because I know because Angel, you've also been doing work around like NAC, for example, and like the culverts with that.
Yeah, well, you know, we have all the data, so we can get it to you if you want to do it. And then if you wanted us to be doing some stuff, we could start, you know, looking at that more. And, you know, it's a process. So if we want to do something, we should start, you know, we can, you know, I think the first thing is, where is it going into the streams? If that's what you're trying to do, is trying to reduce the amount of water, you know, and how much is that water coming from there. I think that would be the first step, if you agree. But
one question we're getting from Wilma is, when was the ditch mapping done? Wilma, to answer your question, the ditch mapping was done. It's been ongoing, so it's been done over the last few years. I don't know when you started, Angel, but I know we've been doing it, and we continue to do it. I don't know about this year.
Yeah.
If you're going to be doing it over this summer, but
yeah, we have funding to hire 2 field staff, but obviously with the current situation and distancing, I just don't know what we're gonna do right now. And we have 2 people usually in the car together all day, and then usually they're sitting right behind me in my office. So so this year is kind of we don't know what to do right now, but in terms of hiring again, but that's what I wanted to do, is hire again. But we've had, so far that I've had field staff, I've had 3 seasons so far. So 2017, 2018, and 2019. And I started working with Cornell prior to that. And Cornell, the Water Resources Institute, initially started this project where they were mapping culverts for their culvert capacity model, where the model looks at the culverts and gives you, basically gives you that what the output is what capacity storm that culvert can currently handle. So can it handle a 1-year event? Can it handle a 2-year, 10-year, and on? So, but the thing with that was, and I've kind of gotten myself into a data nightmare in sorts, is because, so they started and they didn't have GPS equipment to get accurate data. They were using cell phones. So sometimes, the data wasn't bad, but it's just that sometimes, depending on the reception, sometimes the points would be, way out in the field. I mean, they just wouldn't be necessarily on the culvert. And then, as they learned, that their forms changed a little year to year, which is great. What happens, that happens. Okay, this isn't important. This is important. But bringing all that data into one has really been tough, and I've gotten it where it's all into one. But now when I got funding, so I'm in my 2nd grant now, but the first grant, we were awarded funding not only for the field staff, but also for the GPS equipment. And we ended up going with centimeter grade equipment so that we could get really accurate data and map the ditches, the culverts, catch basins, and any other infrastructure. Ideally we wanted to capture the drain tiles and anybody piping into the ditches also. But so that was our goal. And so we've been doing the ditches, and then this past season they also went back to all those, not all of them, to a subset, and remapped those culverts. So they got a point at the inlet and the culvert at the outlet, because at the end of the day, we really want a really detailed map that maps, from ditch to culvert to the stream. We really want to connect everything and say, okay, this is how everything is connected, and this is the watershed draining to that area. So if that answers the question, it's been more like 6 years, but 3 years with the equipment.
So we got another comment from Elizabeth saying Cannon Road suffers from undersized culvert pipes. A bridge would be better, accommodate water flow during big storms. So I guess Cannon Road first, again, I guess the county, I never really understood this, Angel, but I guess the one thing is the county does not have the jurisdiction over the town roads.
But bridges.
What?
But if there's a bridge, so I don't think the situation
there isn't a bridge right there now.
Yeah, but I think if they oversee once it's over 20 feet, I think.
Elizabeth, right now you said there's just a culvert.
Yes.
It's a big culvert.
A big culvert.
A big culvert pipe that really should be a bridge, because every time we have a big rainstorm, it just becomes this big whirlpool in front of it, and then it flows over the road. Because it's the west branch of the Wego Creek, and it's a lot of flow from the hills up here.
That must be a knack culvert, I'm thinking.
Yeah, it's like a big old. It looks like almost like an old steam barrel. It's an old, really thick, bolted, or riveted culvert pipe. I don't know what you really call it, but.
Can you walk through the culvert? Is it that size?
it could be like 6 feet around or something, but but
If we've
it's
been, yeah, if
good.
we've been in that area, it's probably mapped. I mean, we could take a look at that, Osama.
I mean, it almost every year that flows over.
Mhm.
And they rebuilt it once because there was a flood that really took it out.
Mhm.
But it did a lot of damage.
Yeah.
And it was rebuilt, and I think they put a bigger culvert
No,
pipe
they
in.
didn't.
Oh, they didn't.
No.
Okay, Jim says no.
They
Okay.
just reinforced the bank with stone blocks because it was washing out real close to the road. But the
And this is-
Weirgo Creek has got so much. It's more of it's a creek and not just a waterway. So it trees wash down and all kinds of stuff during those big storms. And it just,
And this is Canaan Road specifically and not
This is-
Harford Road by
yeah,
Canaan
this
Road?
is where Canaan. Basically, it's right at the county line. It's where
Yeah.
Canaan is the beginning of Canaan. For the first house or two is in Richford, and then it switches over to Caroline. So it bridges the two counties right there.
Yeah, so it's going to be a complicated spot just from that standpoint.
Yeah, I bet.
Is it completely Canaan Road or is it also Harford Road?
No, it's all Canaan.
It is all Canaan Road, okay.
Yeah.
Because the creek is I forget your name, Elizabeth, your husband's name?
Oh, Jim.
Jim. That the creek is the boundary between
County boundary, yeah.
Tompkins County and
And that's the Chesapeake watershed too.
yeah.
Yep.
So it's, I mean, it's something that, certainly we can look at, and if we need inter-county communication to deal with it, I'm sure we can work that out. But thanks for putting it on our radar.
And I also want to mention it also floods at the Liddington Road side. So there are actually two spots that the creek tends to flow over the road, maybe
Okay.
a mile and a half apart.
I don't know what town that one's in.
So that's Tioga County, right? No, is that?
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure where that is.
Yeah, and once we figure out where it is, I'm happy to, I work a lot with Tioga County Soil and Water, and they do, they work a lot with their highway department. So there's ways we can.
It does, I mean, the road is really close to the culvert. In other words, there's not much of a bank on either side where that culvert, it's kind of washing out slowly. Our neighbor was concerned about it being so close to the road, the opening there.
You're saying it is eroding then?
It's slowly eroding because every time that we have a heavy storm, all the gravel on each side of the road erodes away. And it's the only thing that's holding it together is a bunch of knotweed right now.
I think that's the case in a lot of places.
Yeah. Anyway, that's just an aside. I know it's not. It's probably a more our little regional problem here, but.
Well, no, it's good to know because again, we're focusing specifically on the town of Caroline, and that does fall obviously within the area, so that is good to know, and we will definitely consider those kind of problems in our analysis. And we do, the helpful thing with Angel's data is we do have the ditch data in which we have noted the conditions of the existing ditches, whether it's not eroding, whether it is eroding, or whether that needs to be addressed immediately.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we definitely have that kind of data, so we can use that into consideration in terms of like specific areas that need to be addressed or are particularly vulnerable, especially around flooding.
Yeah, I mean, I know one of these days it's probably going to completely flood our house just because it's come close a couple times.
That is good to know. Yeah, I guess, are there any other concerns I guess, especially around, I guess, the social implications around not just flooding, but also like the heat waves and the droughts? I would like to also like think about those. And as I guess we continue to, as the temperatures continue to rise and as the number of droughts tend to increase due to the extreme weather events, I think that is also something that we need to look at in terms of how are droughts going to affect our region, especially around like the like vegetation and like the farms. And I know like working with farms can be a bit difficult, especially when their main thing is looking at the existing, the they're trying to make a living, and so they're trying to do their work, but at the same time, some of the infrastructure that they might have might not be the best suited for this changing weather. And I know, Angel, that you also know, like, the tile drainage can also be a big problem sometimes, especially addressing around water contamination issues, correct?
Sorry, I hit something. So I don't know in terms of water contamination. I don't know. I mean, I know that there's been some, I don't know the water quality results, so I can't really speak to that. I mean, there is a state level grant that I know of, and I know that we're working with some farms on the climate resiliency, the agricultural climate resiliency. So I know that there's some projects, I want to say there's a few that were awarded. And I think one is in Caroline, but anyway, there's that pot of money, but I can't really speak to the water quality coming out of tile drains.
Okay, well, I'm trying to figure out this last slide here. So the last few questions that I guess we have is like, those who are most affected in terms of like the social side of things, we have here noted as like elderly and disabled individuals. And I know I was talking to Wilma before this, and she was saying that she's working on a project, and you were saying, Wilma, that especially around the senior citizen or elderly population, and that is something that you're focusing on right now, and their vulnerabilities, particularly around social services and like the changing weather and extreme weather patterns.
Well, I'm working on what's called an age-friendly project. It's really to cover people of all ages, but to be sure that seniors are included. And the project that we're planning to focus on is establishing emergency preparedness neighborhood groups are headed in.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I guess, Irene, do you know anything about that? And because I know you're also on the county emergency management board.
Yeah, I'm not on the county emergency management board. I had formed a working group that was looking at provision of emergency services. And that group has completed its work, although Mark and I are now on, sort of round 2 of a committee that's again looking at emergency service provision and how to enhance it and expand it within not just the town, but throughout the county and even beyond, to look at successful models and to make proposals to the state of what needs to be done. But it's I think, it's certainly related. And I have to say that the whole time that we're doing this meeting and thinking about the vulnerabilities, it seems to me that another vulnerability that needs to go on everybody's list, in addition to heat waves and flooding and drought, is pandemics. And how do we manage those? And certainly, the reduced number of emergency service volunteers and the lack of ambulance service in the town, and a variety of things weigh on our capacity in that regard. And weigh into our capacity to respond to any number of these emergencies, whether it's flooding or droughts and the fires that result, and as Will has put in the notes, that when you have heat or drought, you have less water available for our fire trucks to dip into and suck up, and we don't have, again, without municipal water supplies, we also don't have fire hydrants throughout the town. So, limited access to water becomes an issue for fire safety as well. So Yeah, so you know, I see that the work that I've done on emergency services is, you know, kind of related to this, but not directly in the way that you were thinking, I guess.
Yeah, but I know that there was at the TCOG presentation a while back, we were talking about the accessibility in terms of emergency services. And I remember Caroline was rated in terms of accessibility pretty low, or it's not.
Yeah,
It's not to get the emergency services you need.
Yeah, it wasn't accessibility, it was the response time for an ambulance to get to us. And yeah, it's, you know, 15, 20 minutes, for sometimes, you know, depending how far out in Caroline, even further, you know, even longer than 20 minutes to get an ambulance from downtown. So.
And I guess that I don't know who it was I was talking to, but I guess I was told that changed within the last few years, and therefore the map might not be totally accurate. But do you know of anything that the services has changed?
That's not true. That map was done just last year with a grad student who mapped it out based on where the emergency service providers were and the response times. You know, so, you know, it used an algorithm. There's, you know, certainly some kind of variability because of the algorithm that may have some inaccuracies, but I think overall it seems pretty true to form that it's, you know, 20 minutes to get an ambulance from Bangs downtown out to Caroline. So yeah, those maps I think were in fact pretty accurate. At least I haven't heard of anybody who disputes them. There were two kind of maps, Osama, that we did. One that showed, you know, the existing conditions, and then one that had some proposed modifications. But so far, Bangs hasn't really been willing to consider those modifications, and so nothing's changed from those maps.
Yeah. And Bangs is the main, I guess, emergency response that serves Caroline, correct?
They are the ambulance service that provides service to Caroline and also to several other towns. They've got what's called a certificate of need throughout the county. Dryden, Groton, and Trumansburg have their own ambulance services, but all the other areas are serviced by Bangs. So Newfield, Danby, Caroline, Enfield, Lansing gets some help from Bangs and some from Groton, but certainly the whole southern part of the county is served by Bangs.
That's good to know. I guess the main reason why I wanted to bring that up, because I do know that there's obviously emergency response and the timing is also a key factor, because that not only depicts the accessibility between the regions and the services that for those who are especially vulnerable, elderly population, but also those who are might have a disability, are especially prone to these hazards. Like if there was to be some kind of natural disaster, or even like during this pandemic, like how can those people get access, or how can they get anywhere if they do not have transportation, especially like if they're not close to TCAT, for example. So I appreciate you talking about that.
Yeah, all of you know the above.
Osama.
Yes.
Part of the reasoning that behind looking at neighborhood groups is because we don't really have any one way to communicate with everybody because we're so spread out and circumstances vary in each little hamlet. That was those were some of the thoughts behind going with neighborhood groups, that it would make use of people's experience, knowing their own and would help with the communications problems that could easily be part of the problems we would have in an emergency.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
and I guess that,
communication is a huge social factor out here.
yeah, and I guess that's we're sort of experiencing that now with this whole coronavirus pandemic and the difference they have right now with the Tompkins Mutual Aid. They have the community pods in which I know this is mostly in Ithaca, the city of Ithaca in Tompkins County, but also there's groups trying to create these neighborhood pods in which they're trying to connect with their local neighbors, especially those, and connecting with those who might not have access to, like, going to the grocery store, some basic needs, even like maybe mowing their lawn or something like that, or helping if there's if they're sick, then they can call the hospital. They can take the temperature and help in any way that they can. So I guess what Tompkins Mutual Aid is doing now is sort of, I guess, a good example of like how that could potentially happen countywide and implementing that. So I think that obviously is not just for things like a pandemic, but also other types of events, like even like things like natural disasters or any kind of social disruption or some kind of emergency where services are needed but not really accessible in the rural neighborhoods. And I see here that from Elizabeth, Jim and I are making some neighborhood food pods to be distributed through mutual aid. So I guess what has been your response? I mean, what has been your response so far, Elizabeth, if you don't mind giving us some
My response.
reviews?
So we're just getting started. We made one pod that's going to get installed downtown in an Ithaca neighborhood INHS housing complex, and we're going to probably start to do a small run. And I know that there are folks scattered around ready to make some of these pods, or these little mini food pantries. Essentially, they're going to be stocked by either Food Bank of the Southern Tier, FDN, with kind of like neighborhood captains that are going to take that on and stock the little pantries. And they could be in people's yards. I think that's kind of the model. And there's some funding in place to help to build them. So yeah, if anybody's interested, there's a group that's it is mostly Ithaca based, but you could certainly kind of like jump right into that group if you were interested, or anyone really.
Yeah. So I'm actually doing one myself up where I am. I live actually out of Tompkins County in Seneca County, where it's a very different dynamic of people up here. Not as cooperative or neighborly as many times Ithaca residents are. But yeah, it's interesting because there are a lot of people that don't expect I guess there's some people that are skeptical about the whole idea, especially around people just coming up to your doorstep and asking if those people need any help. It's just like totally unexpected in our culture, I guess, in modern culture, not just in American culture. But yeah, and I think like especially in rural areas, it'd be difficult to create these pods or these mutual aid groups because people just aren't used to that, especially those who live in like more rural areas. So yeah, I don't know if like, so you said you've been doing work mostly in the Ithaca, Tompkins County, Ithaca area. Have you thought much, has anyone here thought much about mutual aid in like the more rural communities like Caroline?
So I think there's, definitely need. I mean, and I think I think it's an identified need that people recognize that this model should be kind of pushed out into rural areas. Yeah, I mean, I know I've been working with somebody in my neighborhood who has no transportation, has, really limited access to food. And like, I think there are lots of pockets of need scattered all over the place. And yeah, and I think, that kind of people getting together to kind of help to kind of shine a light on those pockets, because I think it can be addressed, right? If we, and I certainly think that there's funding to kind of get some of the physical little mini food pantries in place to kind of help address that a little bit. The harder piece probably is finding like that neighborhood captain that's going to help kind of, take charge of that little pantry. But possible kind of tapping into networks. So I'm thinking about the need for one in McLean, for instance. And I may not know anybody that might take charge of that, but I know people I could ask that might. So I'm thinking in that way about how to, kind of push it out, or what part can I play in that?
Yeah. Has anyone else, I guess, seen or worked with mutual aid? If there's any, has anyone been participating in that? It doesn't have to be just in Caroline, but just in general. Has anyone been heard about?
I have, but obviously, but
yeah. And I know it's starting to be a big thing because of the whole accessibility issue. And in this area, I guess there's a regional transit authority, which there's a little bus that you see going around picking people up. But other than that, when that's when that doesn't run, then people do not have access to like grocery stores and stuff. So like just asking your neighbor, like, do you need me to get you something, or do you need a ride somewhere? Things like that can be, yeah, it's very important and very helpful in keeping notice. But the main problem, as I see in rural areas so far with my little experience that I had, was, yeah, the unexpectedness of the whole, connecting with your neighbor, especially if you live in a rural area. And I guess, Wilma, that would be interesting to see. And I'm going to follow up with you about this too, because I definitely want to learn more about so far your efforts, especially around like the senior elderly population, working with them and addressing their needs. One last thing before we wrap up, because I know people have to probably go, is we've been hearing a lot about aquifer overflow, aquifer flooding in the town of Caroline, especially I guess around, I guess people have springs in their backyard. And sometimes those can go out of control. And as a result, their yard floods and they don't know what to do about it. And so I guess, has anyone else here heard about that or experienced events like that?
Yes, we've experienced that as well.
Really?
We got it all. Lots of water.
I mean, that's what I've always said about our place. It's it's like a hillside, but it's like wet all the time. It's just the way it is.
Yes.
So you're saying it usually happens?
Yeah, the water table is really close to the surface, so there's springs everywhere.
Yep. So
you're saying it usually happens in areas that are close, like along the hillside, would you say? Because Elizabeth, I'm assuming you live on the side of a hill, based on
yeah,
your
kind of at the base.
description.
Yes.
kind of happens. Yeah.
And just to throw it
One
out,
side is a, yeah.
sorry,
What's
just
that?
throw it out there too, Asamu. Just, we get a lot of calls with drainage issues and water issues, and I've been out to various properties throughout the county, and a lot of people who say we've never had this seep here, and now there's a seep. So it just seems to be consistent across the county that there's just, the groundwater table is high and just seeps are appearing where nobody ever saw them before.
Do you have any idea why that might be?
I mean, I've always just, that the groundwater table is high just with the water, you know, the amount of water we're getting and it's just, you know, coming out because it is high. So just how do you deal with it? And each land, you know, each site is different and how they want to deal with it and what are the impacts of it.
That's good to know. And it's across the county. And I guess, yeah, that sort of shows that with the increased precipitation that the county has been experiencing, that is going to be an increasing issue maybe across the county, especially those that are in ravines or along the hillsides. Okay, well, thank you everyone for all your comments and knowledge. This is very useful. I will definitely, I'm making note of a lot of this stuff that we're talking about today, and we will be following up with this process as we continue to do this analysis, and we'll be coming up with a report within the month. And then we'll be sending it out to the town of Caroline, which will be then accessible to the public. And then for further comments and review, they'll be going through that process. And we'll definitely contact you all again once that's is finalized. But again, before everyone leaves, I would like to ask everyone if you have the chance to participate in the survey. Survey I sent over the email, but if you do not have access to it or have just joined the call through word of mouth, I'm more than happy to send you the survey link if you provide me with your email. So does anyone here not have access to the survey or would like me to send them more information on something?
Well, I also linked the survey and a longer version of this PowerPoint is on our website, southerntiercec.org/Caroline-CVA. So that's in the chat. You can just enter that into your browser and it should take you to the right spot. And we encourage, anyone that hasn't taken it, please do take it. And if you have friends, neighbors, family that live in Caroline, please encourage them to take it as well. This process is only going to be as good as the input that we get from it. And as Osama said earlier, we can do a lot of the black and white. We can look at the projections and do an analysis off of this, but neither Osama nor I live in Caroline. And so we really rely on a lot of you that are on the call and especially the other folks that live in Caroline to really paint the picture of what's going on. So please pass it along if you're able to.
Yep. Okay. So have you gotten survey results, a decent number back at this point?
As of now, we got, let's see, I'm looking now. As of now, we so far got about 20 responses.
Okay.
And again, the survey is pretty long, so for those who have gone through the survey itself, it's good because obviously they're pretty committed, whoever those 20 people are. So yeah, it's definitely, I would recommend taking it. It takes about, I would say probably about close to 15 minutes to complete. But again, I recommend taking it. It can take less time than that, obviously, but depending on your inputs and what you provide, what information you know about the area. But yeah, that's pretty much it. And if you would like me to send over the PowerPoint or any of the information that I had on the slides, I am more than happy to do that. Just let me know either now or you can email me at ojt3@cornell.edu. Yeah, and that's pretty much it on my part. Oh yeah,
Thank you.
and Terry just provided. Thank you, Mark, and thank you everyone else who participated in this. I appreciate you coming out, and hope you all have a great rest of your day and weekend as well. And we'll definitely let you know when this project wraps up. And yeah, we look forward to hearing from you throughout this process.
Great.
Thanks.
Thanks, Osama. Thanks, Terry.